Hello, everybody. My plan is to never give this talk again, because it obviously touches on some weird stuff from my career in the past, which I don't really want to think about anymore. I'll process it in my own way, but I don't think occasionally bringing it up in front of a group of strangers is the right way to process it. So here it is: unsolicited advice from somebody with no formal training. A talk by me, Joseph Allen. Feel free to follow me on Twitter. Validate me however you like, but Twitter's probably the best place to do it. If you like anything data or web related, then yeah, please feel free to follow me there. Disclaimer: obviously, this is a sad-ish story. To start off with, we're going to summarize my university year in industry experience. It starts out pretty sad. It still affects me today, like 5, 6 years later, but there could be a positive spin, and I do try and make that the case in this presentation. So let's start by going back in time. I've just turned 20. It's the year 2015. At the time, I'm in university for computer science. I loved HTML and CSS. The sort of web dev stuff seemed like the obvious path for me. I was doing freelance web dev work, just, getting clients however I can, and I was really enjoying it, and I thought it'd be nice if in a few years I ran my own agency. Ambitious, I know, but that's what I was thinking, and I thought there's no better way to learn how to run an agency than to take part in one. So yeah, it seemed obvious to me. I applied to a bunch of small agencies in Manchester and got a job. So yeah, there's a big audio cue there that I don't know if it will be recorded, and it was definitely way too loud. So I got a job at a web agency, and while not all web agencies are bad places to work at, there is a reputation. They can be quite crunch heavy, quite heartless, and sadly this one did live up to that reputation. I got a job that I'd refer to as sort of a code monkey role. Your job is just to sort of sit there, not ask any questions, not question anyone above you in any way. You work at minimum wage and your work is billed at £65 an hour to clients. The first website I ever built for them was sold for something like £96,000. Before that, I think the most expensive website I'd made was £800. There was no focus on mastery, no time given for anyone to learn anything. There was no use of version control, so if you sort of mess something up, you had to go manually fix it yourself. The developers constantly overwrote each other's code in sort of global CSS files and global JavaScript files. There was no QA, so there was no testing. When something broke, it just kind of exploded, and you were expected to clean it up unless you managed to not be there anymore. So yeah, I realized I was having a pretty bad time at work, but the money was relatively good. I was on 16K a year, and I thought, is this just what jobs are? Is it just this sort of transactional process where we're sort of, trading away our liberties for things that we don't care about? And I asked from my coworkers, family, friends, I just asked them, is this normal? And they said, stuff like, oops, they said stuff like, at least you have a job, that's good money, don't quit, live to work or work to live, jobs aren't supposed to be fun, and oh well, that's life. Um, and yeah, when I started this job, I was still working on websites in my free time. I'd finish work, I'd go home and I'd work on a website. I was trying to learn to set up the same tools that we had at this agency, at least for like, oh, this is a production system, this is how the industry does it, I'm going to copy them. But really, I just realized that this wasn't good tooling and these weren't good processes, and kind of that like all that energy I had to sort of go in this direction just disappeared. So that direction just fell away, and shortly after, my motivation did as well. Before this job, I loved web development. I saw this whole path of life where I'd like set up something in Manchester, people would know who I was. I was just really excited, and that dream just turned into a nightmare. And I spent all of my time just trying to learn to sort of fill in the gaps that this company was leaving me with. Luckily, I wasn't alone. I had a co-worker who had a very similar experience to me. He worked hard, and he was always sort of filling his spare time with amazing projects, running podcasts, going to night school, and he was the only encouraging person in this office. This is a weird picture, but I told him about this talk, and he said, please use this picture. So I have. Um, and at my probation meeting, I was opened with, it's not too late to go back to university. And I still think, why did they say this? What did they want me to do? Yeah, it's weird. It still rings around 6 years later. Um, I was told I was disappointing in every way, and other employees at this time were coming in on the weekend, working weekend, and that was sort of a precedent that was set, that it was normal to work excessively for this small salary, and I hadn't taken a lunch break at this time, and I brought it up. I said I haven't taken a lunch break in a month because I'm trying to work hard without feeling the need to come in on the weekends. And the two managers hadn't even noticed, and there were about 12 people in this office. I went immediately into what I would call survival mode. I could point out lies, special cases that justified my actions, but I knew this wouldn't work. And my biggest concern was just this risk of failing a year in industry, a risk of like, oh, my title is not going to say year in industry, but I've paid thousands of pounds for this ability to have a year in industry on my degree. So I begged for a second chance, and I feel like you're supposed to go into this survival mode to save your life, but I'd been in it for 3 months over a job. This wasn't right. I stopped getting given work for sort of larger projects. I just got these weird like little bug fixes, and I'm sure if any of you have worked in like a job where there's not much to do, you'll know that it's even more boring than when there is much to do. You're just given no mind-numbing tasks. You're just sat there trying to like look busy but not look like you're doing nothing and all sorts of weird stuff. So I finally had some spare time though and padded my days with sort of short personal projects. I'd sort of look at roadmaps to becoming a web dev and see what skills you needed to learn and started learning my own sort of personal stuff. And finally started using those skills for like fun instead of just making these like £100,000 websites for somebody else. I started making stuff like this, which is just, it doesn't look like much, but it's just a mouse hover effect and makes something change color. And it's things like this that I didn't even know you could do in CSS, and nobody ever said, oh yeah, for the profile of our team, I want the picture to change color slightly. It's not something you really think about. But when I did that, I learned CSS transitions, WebKit filters, I learned Sass, I learned Grunt, the Meteor framework for JavaScript, and I learned Git and GitHub, and it was, a more powerful learning experience than almost anything else I did at that job. So these new skills, I had, they were useful, but they were useful at work as well. I could push some code to GitHub. I could sort of help them out with some of their websites. I could showcase, here's what we could be doing with CSS, and that got incorporated into some client work. But then I quickly realized, why am I even bothering? Like, these people have shown that they clearly don't care about an individual. They clearly make a huge amount of markup on each employee, which obviously is what businesses are supposed to do. But yeah, it was just really demotivating to like see all this money and hard work just going into the pockets of some people who had treated me terribly. So I realized I could do much better. So I started applying for some other places. I rang up the careers team at the University of Manchester just to ask them, if I get fired, am I going to lose this qualification? Like, what happens? And I expected to just sort of be pressured to stay there for some metric to be slightly better, but instead I was told, that sounds terrible, get out of there. And it was only in my head that I'd been making this up and sort of bigging this up to be some sort of huge failure of my character. So I got a job at laterooms.com where I made some of the coolest stuff I've ever made. I made two of my best friends. We had stuff like flexi time, mastery time, retros, and I remember I went there on like a trial day. I took a day off work to go work at another company for a day and just see if it was a good fit. And they had a retro that they brought me into. And I remember before the retro started, somebody had been on holiday for a week and they had written a ticket that just said, this person is back from holiday. And they were joking like, should we put this in the happy or sad column? And before they did, they were like, you know what, if we put it in the sad column, it's actually really going to hurt his feelings, even if it's a joke. And I was just sat there like in absolute awe that anyone would consider a fellow employee's emotions and sort of have empathy for those people. That being said, while I was there, I also had panic attacks. I got told off for being emotional and impulsive. So it's not all fantastic, but the bar was just raised astronomically from that first place. And every company I've gone to since has been, increasingly more enjoyable to work at. I started doing fun things like analyzing the WhatsApp chats of my friends, figuring out, how to process a WhatsApp chat, calculate the sentiment of things, all this kind of stuff that's just fun mastery projects. I, I went back to university because I was on my year in industry, and for my third year project, the prompt was make a modern website with a modern web framework, and I just thought that sounds like the most boring thing I could do with my final year of university. Instead, I started creating tools for digital artists, and I've worked on multiple funded digital art pieces since. One example, again, a build up from that WhatsApp sentiment analysis, is this Twitter rose. So you could tweet mean things to it, and if it detected mean things being said to the rose would be poisoned and slowly die. If you sent it nice things, it would be watered, and that would dilute the poison. And if you didn't tweet it anything at all, it would just sort of dehydrate and disappear. Um, and throughout all these projects, I learned multiple things, way more than what's on here, but just all this tooling and all this stuff and all this potential, I only would have explored for fun. I never would have thought like, oh, how can I tweet at a rose for this big organization? I wouldn't, it's not standard work in any way. But they almost always come back to work in some way. They're almost always reusable skills, and if they aren't reusable skills, that's fine too. We don't have to do everything transactionally. We can have hobbies and we can have fun. I sort of split my portfolio website into a professional site and a fun website, and it's just little things like this that it shows you're good at the job, but it shows you actually enjoy what you're doing, and maybe you do enjoy making them anyway. Um, so yeah, as you'll notice, despite a very sad beginning, this story does turn into a success, and it sort of makes me look like a better person and sort of how empowered I was to go through this trial by fire. But I think those kind of stories can justify overworking. They justify you being a valuable web developer over being a valuable person to your sort of family, friends, hobbies, yourself, and your coworkers. And I know personally that all this obsession over like growing and being better in every way um, to excess is a good way just to lose yourself and think about all those opinions from people that you would never take advice from in the first place. So, well, yes, there's growth there. I've also shrunk in many ways. I'm now scared of working for people in a lot of ways. I'm scared of letting down people that are nice to me at work. I think about how an organization values my time, and then that sort of leaks into how I value my time. And that makes things worse as well. And also, yeah, it's harder to see that community in workplaces. I think at first glance, I'd just be like, oh, great, we're doing a bake sale. I'm happy to participate with all these people. And I sort of slowly become more and more skeptical of that the more times I get, let go or made redundant. And yeah, it's very exhausting. And it's taken years of therapy, medication, self-reflection, philosophy, just to even reach this point of self-awareness that I'm at now. And I don't really feel like anything's resolved yet, but it's just this exhausting self-awareness. So yeah, to finish up, I've got what I think are some of the most useful points in this one slide. So this is sort of 5 years of my personal reflection in one slide. So first is that you might feel lonely, but you're not alone. It's highly unlikely that whatever you're going through is you're the only person going through it right now. There's support groups for unemployment, redundancy, codependence, bipolar, recent death, all sorts of stuff. The Manchester Tech Slack has a mental health support channel that is lovely for just smaller day-to-day stuff. People recently in there are just talking about needing vitamin D. So it's not the hardcore stuff, but it's just nice to feel that you can sort of be emotionally open in the tech community. Obviously, this event does that too. Work-life balance, it's so easy to look at sort of the marvels of modern business and absorb that productivity, having a calendar that buzzes your phone or your watch and just making sure everything's organized. It sounds fantastic in my head. Personally, I have like Kanban boards that organize the holidays I want to take, the movies I want to watch. But when I delete those boards, nothing changes. I don't get a sense of chaos. I don't get a sense that I'm not going to know what movie I want to watch. I don't feel liberated either. It doesn't really do anything. It's just like it should have never existed in the first place. A good friend once said to me, struggle with work-life balance until you don't. And I think that's true. I think you do have to sort of go through it a little bit to realize what's important to you. Productivity is sort of the measure of success in our age, and your salary, your side projects, your skills, those are the facts that sort of impress people in your community or at parties, but they don't have to be. I think if there's one thing we can learn is that we're not just the facts that make us up, we're also sort of the potential we have and where the experiences we have had and how we react to them. Um, yeah, embracing the grey in computing. Obviously, it's easy to think that everything is binary and black and white. We're a good or a bad person. We eat a healthy or an unhealthy meal. But the fact is, nobody's perfect. We're the sum of all our parts, and we don't fail if our actions don't always match our intentions. As long as we get back up and we can self-soothe. I do think that if you find yourself obsessed with productivity, you're going to struggle the less refined life becomes, when there's mark schemes or there's sort of like a review process at work. That makes things feel easier, but really life is obviously ambiguous and we should try to be too. Um, Self-care isn't a treat yourself culture, so you might be sold on anxiety blankets, yoga courses, pamper days, but this is really, in my perspective, the market responding to an unhappy society. Self-care can be about responsibly treating yourself, but those treats don't have to be financial treats. Self-care could be about brushing your teeth or having a shower once a day or putting some clothes on. And especially in this year, celebrate those small steps rather than being hard on yourself for not achieving something or writing a book. This is a terrible, terrible year. If we're doing anything, we're doing great. And finally, good employers offer support. That first place I worked didn't offer employees free counseling or well-being service, yoga, whatever you want. But most places I've worked since do offer those things. So feel free to ask. I always think, oh, of course they're not going to offer free counseling, and then I find out they do. And if they don't, you can self-refer to the NHS therapy. I did that like 4 weeks ago, and my first appointment's next week, so it's not as bad as I thought it was. But yeah, that's everything. I think we're not doing questions now. We'll do questions later. But I guess for you, you're watching it on a YouTube channel. So